What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a very short introduction for each of these gentlemen, and then I'm going to ask them to talk a little bit about their journey so that we have context about how they look at private companies and private company boards from their perspectives. And I think by hearing their journey, I think it'll be helpful to have that. So Brent DeYoung is chairman and CEO of Quenta, Inc. and Agrico Acquisition Corp. He's also managing partner at DeYoung Capital and serves as chairman on the boards of Rivermet and Savia Peru. Is that right? Brett was previously partner and head of special situations at Castle Lake. He was director and advisor at RAA Holdco, as well as an investment professional, head of special situations and investment committee member at Ashmore. So we've got a wonderful investor perspective here today. Jarvis Hollingsworth is vice chairman and chief operating officer at Irradiant Partners, LP, an investment advisor that focuses on investments in renewable energy and liquid and private credit. Previously, he served as Secretary General Counsel on the boards of directors of Kayne Anderson Capital Advisors, LP, and is a former partner of the law firm Bracewell, LLP, where he served as the firm's management committee. So a wonderful perspective as a director and executive for private companies as well. So I'm going to ask each of you to just give a 2-minute perspective on your backgrounds and how you got to where you are today and the different positions you've gone through to give our audience today an idea of where you're coming from when you look at private companies.
Well, great, I'll start. Good afternoon, wonderful to be here with you. As Anna indicated, I'm a lawyer by training, so I spent 30 years doing finance and fiduciary government, corporate governance law at large law firms. Went in-house a few years ago as the general counsel for an investment management firm, and Irradiant is a company that the CEO and I, formerly of Kayne Anderson, decided we wanted to leave the firm and start our own firm. So that's how we got to be Irradiant. He chairs the firm, I vice chair and serve as a chief operating officer. My board career really began through nonprofit, through government, sort of through industry advocacy. I served on the board of the YMCA, Child Advocates, State Bar of Texas, and then graduated to my first private equity portfolio company. It was an energy company here in Houston. And also served in a couple of appointed positions by elected officials, where I was chairman of Texas Teachers, which is about a $200 billion pension system based in Austin, where we make the investments to pay the annuities for retired education-related employees, teachers, bus drivers, lunchroom workers, and was able to parlay my practice and combined with government board experience, chairing boards of universities as well as governmental entities, into private service through my first portfolio company board, and since that point, I've served as a director of Cullen Frost Bankers, which is Frost Bank as we know it. I also serve on the board of Laredo Petroleum, which is based in Tulsa, E&P company. Served also, again, I'm back serving as chairman of TRS again, and so I also serve as the lead director of a company called Core Scientific, which is a large data infrastructure and Bitcoin and blockchain mining firm. So sort of my story is I used government and free nonprofit work to build my skills and attract the attention of corporate entities who saw the correlation, and then have given me the opportunity to serve on corporate boards.
That's great. Thank you. Brent?
Yeah, I guess my career kind of move into boards actually started in the early 2000s, and it was more by happenstance than anything. I was at a firm in London called Ashmore at the time, and we grew from 1 billion to 80 billion of assets under management in 10 years. And being an early investment professional, I think I was employee number 26. You kind of do everything. So I sat on every investment committee, and I ran the special situations business. And And part of that, during that time, one of the transactions that I did is I purchased Enron International. And so I came here as the CEO. It says it was a mix of capital, some from Ashmore, some from a mix of private equity and sovereign wealth funds. And they said, look, you dreamt up that you can fix this thing, so you go do it. And it was a pretty, throw me in to the fire right away at 30 years old, being a CEO of a multi-line business while still maintaining portfolio responsibilities for some of the other portfolio companies. It was the best possible thing that I could have done because I got lucky to be in and around 7 phenomenal board members and based here in Houston, tons of real core board experience. And quite honestly, I learned through osmosis, through working with them, a good audit chair, a good governance chair, and they beat the crap out of me. They're like, it doesn't matter that you did this,
They're supposed to.
a big multi-billion-dollar deal. You're going to have to, answer to us and do things the right way. And it was the best learning experience that I could have had. Fast forward, I've now been involved in or done 250 transactions in 50 countries. At the peak, I had 110 portfolio boards reporting to me with 37,000 employees and staffing every board in terms of full set of directors, CEOs, CFOs, general counsels, and so on. In reality, I became an HR person. I was no longer an investor. But again, it was a great experience as well.
Wow. So very different journeys that these gentlemen have had. And I wanted them to tell that because I think one of the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to private companies is they are so vastly different. There's so many different shapes and sizes of private companies. You've got, we're in a building here where there's people who get startup companies. They have ideas and they start something up and friends and family help fund it. That's private. You've got private companies such as the ones I've been on where they have been public and a private equity company takes them private. That's a real different game. Then you have family-run companies. You've got all sorts of different types, sizes, shapes of private companies. One of the things we're interested here in NACD and possibly for the audience here is these boards must be very different when you construct them. You say you've constructed a lot of boards. So what are the stages of board construction that you go through and that you've seen go through that might answer the question, when is it time to join a private board? When do you look for people with my skills, people here in the audience? How do you decide on what are the voices around the table that you need?
I guess I can start. I mean, I really like public company experience. But I really, really enjoyed private company experience and still do. Especially, if it's a startup, it's rewarding, there's a new idea, everybody's excited, you're meeting with investors, you've got a CEO who's fired up about it, so it's rewarding. There's also, I guess, 1,000 or more private companies to every public company. So there's many, many opportunities for board service in private companies. Now, on the flip side of that is, it's a private company. So, as a director, you're responsible for the shareholders. Well, in some of those, the CEO is a shareholder, an investor, might be on the board.
Right.
And so the challenge associated with that, and of course, each time as a non-governance lawyer, I was brought in to be an independent director. There were some of those companies where I would have multiple, because you put a founder, somebody gives you money, they would say, I want a board seat. So in many of those situations, I was the minority as an independent director, and everybody else had an interest in the company. So, in those situations, it's really about looking at the company, looking at what the needs are on the private company side. Obviously, having someone who's going to be a financial expert so you can get them to chair the audit committee. Finding someone really good that understands compensation, obviously is really, really important as well. And, the private company, even though they don't have the same requirements as SEC, required filings and the like. As the independent director, you've really got to be on your toes because the structure typically is not there. And it's not because they don't mean well, it's just that they're so focused on getting that product or service to be successful and, making the company work.
Well, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I always say to private company investors and directors, good governance is good governance, right? Regardless of what kind of company you are, good governance is good governance. Now, do you need all of the requirements of a public company? Heck no, you don't need that. But, the other thing to think about is many private companies have an exit strategy. What is that strategy? When do you start looking at it? So you've put together a lot of boards. How do you do this? How do you decide on what kind of people you need?
Yeah, I think also I often start where's the company in its life cycle and its journey. And if it's going to be a rapid growth company, then maybe you're over-investing in governance and kind of building forward. But a lot of times, private equity, and I was guilty of this wearing the private equity hat, but I've also sat on boards for other private equity as well, is they are very focused on that product, or they're very focused on those value drivers. And they're so opinionated that it's almost as if they're running the company. And so process often moves to the side, and it's like, hey, we got to do, be cost conscious. We have to, get this product done, and we have to, focus on, just making it. And so that's obviously not a sustainable scenario, but that's often a very realistic scenario. Now, some private equity really value operating performance. Others are a little bit more macro-driven, investment strategies. So it really depends on the nature of the capital, how they've represented themselves to their LPs, their investment style. And so you kind of have to judge, all of it. And it is a little bit of a juggling act. And, but ultimately things change. So what you might start with in phase one, you can get to phase two pretty quickly, which may be more governance, more process, and you just kind of have to make that judgment call based off the life cycle and as well as the dynamics of both the directors and the management.
So one of the most difficult things that I've found on boards is when you realize you're sitting on a board, you realize you need new blood, and you realize you need refreshment. Finding new directors is not hard. Getting rid of old directors is impossible. How do you do this when, you obviously see private companies go through a journey, and you say at different rates of speed. How do you ensure that when you need different talent, that people around the table understand that?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? You bruise egos. People feel just insulted if they're not needed or asked to leave. Today, that's a lot easier for me. I've had a number of people that have worked in or around me now for a couple decades. And often what I do is say, look, the skills that are needed here are this. Your skills are this, extremely valuable. You have to validate them as individuals. But you have to just show how the skills are different in terms of what they're bringing versus what's needed. And now, as I said, people have left and have come back and worked with me on other companies, since. And so it's a lot easier I can say, hey, Joe or Sally, look at what they've done, and this is just the way it works. But early in my career, when I'm having these discussions, there's the young asshole who's gonna just boot us out, and it's like, no, that's not what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So,
what experience have you had, Jarvis?
Yeah, it's interesting. We just, one company where I'm on the board, I'm the lead director, and we just went public. And so, as lead director and NomGov chair was my task.
You were popular, I bet.
Go out and find the board. And this was a startup. It's a Bitcoin and blockchain mining company, data firm. And sort of word got out, and everybody was like, okay, I missed the internet. This is my chance. And we're still waiting for all that to happen, by the way. But there were a lot of people who were really interested. And, that's when my board experience really came into play. I wanted a very, very experienced comp committee chair who had done it, knew how to do it. I wanted to make sure I had that financial expert, so I needed a great person to chair the audit committee. And fortunately, I've been doing boards long enough that I had 2 or 3 people in mind immediately.
Yeah.
And so, that's a great thing about board experience. Another thing, the point I'll step aside and make that's unrelated to your question is, your experience, your interactions with other directors is the absolute best resume for future boards. I've served on multiple boards with the same people. Sometimes I brought them into boards. Sometimes they brought me into boards. CEOs who I've not always had the best relationship with have come back to me in future years and said, will you come serve on this board with me? Brent and I have served on a couple of boards together where he's approached me about them. So, your best resume for future board service is one, whatever you're currently doing, and 2, all the C-suite professionals and people who you interact with who watch what you do, know how committed you are, know how conscientious you are, and that you're going to be focused on the task at hand. So,
it's interesting. One of the things that we struggle with on public boards is we seem to often want to load the board up with people that have industry experience. If you're an oil company, you want oil people. And I always find myself asking, how many industry experts do we need? How do you balance the skills and background when you're thinking about startup companies? Obviously, you want people that understand the industry if you're getting a company going. But is it easy to overload with that?
Yeah, it is easy to overload with it, but also, as of late, I've been doing a little bit more venture tech investing, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing, there's not
a lot of people.
dearth of industry experience, for sure. And so, in some ways, that's been fun because then you really think about, well, what's the personality? What are the types of people that we need to help support this team to get this company to where it needs to go. But the other thing that often, if it's a private company that's moving towards public, starts thinking about is, well, I need that audit committee, I need that governance committee or talent committee chair, and that's where sometimes I see non-industry people who are starting to come on the boards earlier, because the private often is super quick to kind of just, let me grab this industry expert, because again, it's very product-driven, very value, KPI-driven, as opposed to more process. And so when you start thinking about more sophisticated governance, or one day I want to go public, or you start, even if it's a large private company and you're starting to value succession planning and process and different things, then the non-industry experts, but then they have technical expertise that are creeping onto the boards.
If I had to add one thing to that, Anna, as well, is I'm in a couple of searches right now where I'm the NomGov chair. And, the skills we're looking at have absolutely nothing to do with what the company is doing. We have great expertise on the board, but we're watching the trends. And so, for example, the energy company, we want to be the energy company of the future. So we're looking for expertise in sustainability. We're looking for some technology/marketing type experience. We're looking for ESG-focused members who have, and I will tell you, some of the certifications, not to put in a plug for NACD, but some of the certifications in ESG and in other specialties are things that, once we see the expertise, it's not why we select them, but it may be the differentiator between them and another candidate.
That's interesting, because it leads into the questions I actually wanted to get into. I wanted to move from just board construction to overall strategy in private companies that boards have to oversee. If you're on public boards, that there's a lot of interest being put on ESG, there's a lot of stuff on board diversity, there's a lot of that stuff going on. Is that creeping into the private sector as well? At what point in the life cycle of a private company do you start thinking about that? Is that from day one? Or is that after you've gotten a product or service launched? When do you start thinking about that, Brent?
So I think you need to think about it early, but I think it really depends on the nature. If this is a young, kind of entrepreneur starting up, often they are thinking about it because it's part of their ethos.
Right.
And But if you're a mid-level person stepping out and you're taking a lot of risk and you're kind of first time for a wealth creation opportunity, often they don't think about it because they're very cost conscious and they haven't grown up in the young age where it's just part of life, and they're not part of a structured capital group where private equity today, every private equity has an ESG policy, and it is part of it. So there is a section that it's not part of, but I would say at least 2/3 or 3/4 of those that I come across have it as part of their stated policy, and it's a little bit of a question how much they actually follow their policy, but it is an important part of stakeholder management, and I think an important part of success today.
That's great. So, okay, this is wonderful. We're getting some questions that people are texting. That's the number. It magically appears on my iPod here. I'm so excited. What due diligence about the company do you do in joining a private board that doesn't have publicly available information?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think first, I'll start. First is, and this is not necessarily an intuitive question to ask, especially if you'd like to serve on a board or more boards and you're not on one or you're not on as many as you'd like to be, is, am I interested in whatever they're doing? Because that's going to drive how much time you spend preparing. It's going to drive a number of things that are going to impact how good of a director you're going to be. So am I interested? Next is, what value do I add? What do I bring? How am I going to be helpful to this board in whatever their short and midterm, long goals are? Because you're going to spend a lot of time on this subject matter. Like one of the things we're doing at one of the companies is an E&P company, and we're looking for cyber and IT experience. Yeah. And a big question I spend with each of our candidates is what do you know about oil and gas? I mean, are you going to be zoned out? Because that's what we talk about 95% of the time. Are you going to sort of perk up when a technology question comes up? Then, you're not going to be that director we're looking for, and you're not going to be very happy spending 2 days talking about things that you don't care about. So I'd start there.
Yeah.
I would suggest, obviously sign a confidentiality agreement with a private company. They're all sensitive about it. It's kind of crazy because they're all the same form, and it's everybody, maybe not all, but a lot of them are the same form. But I would start there, and I would ask for a lot of information, and you're gonna see pretty quickly, if you're talking to a CEO and whoever's helping build the board of, well, how transparent is this company? Are they willing? They might not. There's a difference between having it and willingness. Right? A lot of private companies are not well organized, and frankly, that's part of the value that you, as a director, can help bring to them. And so I wouldn't be scared about that if they're not organized, but if they're not willing, that's a very different, thing. And a lot of this is, you have to make a judgment call really about the core values of the senior management and the leaders of this company. Are they just intrinsically aligned with your own core values? Because a lot of stuff's not written. I kind of have a view that, until you get to about 150 people in an organization, it's really kind of informal language that defines those companies or those groups of people. Once you start getting to 150, if you want to have sustainable growth, you really need to have, common language, common ways to relate with one another. Particularly in today's age, where, one of the companies, the Kenta, the fintech platform I'm CEO of, we are a talent first, location second. So of our 400 employees at that company, 35 nationalities in 17 countries, but every time you log on, somebody's in a different country, so whether they're living there or not, I don't know, but you have to be able to live and work in that environment. So I would say ask for what you want, but you've got to make a judgment call, around, the leaders of that organization.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that the few occasions I've had the opportunity to join private board, always sign the NDA, and if you're going through a private equity company, they will provide a lot of information about the company. But I think it's real important to talk to people. I think it's very important to talk to other board members, to insist on chatting with other board members and get a feel for whether you think the chemistry would be good, because as Jarvis said earlier, you've got investors, and if you're one of the few independents, you want to make sure these people are going to actually listen to you and value. And I think that that's something that's really important to do. So the other thing I've asked for, which is always interesting to look at, is can you please send me the last deck from your last board meeting? I like to see how, because that tells me how organized they are, right? Because that's some good due diligence to do, and it can really vary. So
and just as a lawyer, I also meet with the general counsel because it may be inadvertent, but undoubtedly there will be things that you probably should know that they just don't think to tell you. They're not hiding the ball. They just don't share it with you. And so if you sit down with the professionals in the C-suite, and sometimes, they'll look askance at you if you say, I want to meet with the CFO, or if I want to meet with the general counsel. If the CEO really feels like he's got to be there to monitor that conversation, then you might want to think twice about whether or not that's a company you want to join. So meeting with the senior staff, and I think as we all have alluded to, the culture of the board is really important. Is it collaborative? Do they understand how to ask hard questions and disagree without being disagreeable? I'm at the point now in my life where I don't really enjoy spending a lot of time around people who I don't want to be around. And so, it may be something personal for you. It may be that these are just argumentative people, and for 2 days they sit around the table and yell and scream at each other or fuss at each other, and nothing gets accomplished. And that's just not somewhere where I seek to spend my time these days. So
I think that's an important point. And Anna, you talked about chemistry or the culture, and it's not uncommon for me to chair a board today. And one of the things that early on I was really uncomfortable with was not having consensus. I really tried to drive to consensus. When you get into larger companies, you get into a process, it's a little bit easier not to have consensus.
Right.
But there's a big difference between not having consensus and this bickering, right? And so on the smaller private boards, consensus is more important than ever. But there is a way to disagree still, put it on record, but still go along with the majority. And it's while that's important on big company boards, it's more important, in my opinion, on small company boards, because at the end of the day, if you have infighting on strategy or on execution style or different things, that's often more detrimental than having the wrong strategy. And if you have the wrong strategy, you'll get out, you'll realize it quickly, and you'll pivot. But if you sit there and fight, you never get a chance to get out and see it's wrong. And so on a small company, private company board, consensus or you can object politely, but still moving forward quickly is often, quite important.
Yeah, and I think it's good on any kind of a board, especially small, if you're testing strategy, to make sure you know who it is that disagreed and why they disagreed, so that if there's a sign that person was right, you give that person credit and you do pivot. And I think that's actually really important as well.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And that's, and you raise a related point, if I'm feeling like my ideas are not being listened to, or if I'm not raising them during the meeting because I don't feel they'll be listened to, that's a problem as well. Because then you've got these small contingencies of the board that are speaking to each other outside the boardroom. The full board is not aware of the conversations. And not that they can really accomplish things, but it's just a sense of it's the kind of culture you just don't want to have.
Yeah, and the executives notice. The executives know whenever there's bad board behavior going on, everybody knows.
Well, and that's where your board chair or your lead director really earns their stripes in recognizing that, stepping in, speaking to board members outside of the board meetings, and ensuring that everybody's on the same page.
Yep.
So,
one of the things that the conversation alludes to is one of the big differences between a small company and a big company is when little things change, small companies feel it much more quicker. One of the questions we have here is, the hurricane is here per Jamie Dimon. 70% of CFOs expect a recession within the next 9 months. Cash flow is key. The stress of boards is expected to be now through 2023. What advice are you giving your private company CEOs right now?
I've always been counter-cyclical. I like to show up where people, as an investor, where other people don't like to show up.
That's why you're very successul.
I've been at a few different conferences or kind of small group gatherings. I was one last weekend, was more ag science oriented, and it was maybe 20 investors, 30 CEOs. And every investor got up and told every CEO and CFO they need to cut costs. And, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. You have to be careful. It is difficult to raise money. But, I just, you need the runway. You need to work through it. But I'm not sure when everybody's saying something, it could be the self-fulfilling prophecy. But on the other hand, maybe not. So, yeah, prepare for the worst. But don't spend all your time focused on that. There's, a probability, and I think it's a reasonably high profitability, that there are going to be a lot of breakthrough companies here and a lot of, opportunities to, make a lot of money in the cycle. I mean, it's not inconceivable you could have $25 nat gas this summer. Who are the winners and who are the losers in that situation?
Yeah.
And so not every company needs to cut costs. And I think you just need to, reflect on it. But my recommendation is I'll be counter-cyclical, spend some time thinking about the upside, not just about the downside.
Great.
Yeah, I think it depends on where each company is. In energy, for example, everybody's been trying to get away from being gassier and being more oilier. And now, gas is... so...
Hey, coal's back. JP Morgan's financing coal projects now.
So, that's one of the things we're doing is, we're, one company, we're sort of happier that we have more gassier wells now. The other thing that we're doing, and all this, of course, there's no MNPI in any of this, but, stock repurchases are, depending on where your company is and what industry you are. And one of my boards, it was very controversial between directors. We decided to do a fairly large stock repurchase, and the market reacted tremendously positively to it. Of course, there could have been varying reactions to that, but it worked. But it was a really thoughtful, deep, long conversation at our last board meeting about what we think is in the best interest of the long term of the company. And there were differing views, and everybody gave theirs. We're very collaborative. There was disagreement. A majority voted to do it, and it turned out to be the right thing to do. So just an example of culture and strategy. Great. Where they meet and it works.
I've got a number of questions here about background that you look for private companies. It's not a secret that if you're a former CEO or CFO, you're highly sought after. And yet everyone's talking about we need all these different experiences around the table. How serious are people about looking for those different experiences? And the specific question here I found interesting is, everyone says they need marketing, but nobody seems to really need marketing, even though they say they need marketing. And as a marketing person, I'm actually interested in the question because I find it is a challenge. So, honestly, what do you look for? Do you really look for people who can hit the ground running because they were a former CEO and that's all you're looking for?
Look, I'm chair of a NomGov right now in a search, and we're not looking for CEOs.
All right, so talk to him.
We're not looking for CEOs. We're looking for technology, because we want to be the company of the future. We're trying to get ahead of the game. Stakeholders aren't going anywhere. And so you must have a sustainable strategy. Just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you've got to be diverse. And so, we're looking for, we have enough directors with the core company strategy as their experience, and we literally are building out everything to complement that, to market new strategies, to make sure we're on top of new technologies, to ensure that we can really understand where our risk is from a cyber perspective. I mean, in one of my companies, the directors are included in those phishing exercises that go out to all the employees.
God help you.
And, you know, if you get in a hurry and click on it, you got to do the training again, just like every employee does. So,
That's right.
So we really are focusing on, and I think it's just a different time where we're building out a broader cross-section of skills, because you don't need 9 investment bankers. You don't need, 9 financial people. You need someone, and I think this whole diversity idea has created, not just with respect to ethnicity, but also just the fact that different ideas, geography, it all creates a better product. And I think, companies are starting to live that. The empirical data is now there. So if you're not doing that, you're really not paying attention to what's going on.
Please don't put me on a board with 9 investment bankers. God.
Well, I think for me, a lot of it's been transactional driven in terms of a lot of the boards that I've built out. And so when you're doing transaction, often you're in a rush. And so your first directors that you get in often are some of the easiest. And then once you kind of have a status, kind of quo group, then I find you can take a little bit more time, do the types of searches that Jarvis is talking about, and look for the broader skill sets. It wasn't uncommon for a lot of the industry executives, and particularly when you wear the private equity hat, somebody would show up and say, this is a great transaction, this is a great strategy, and I believe in it, hey, pay me equity, because I really believe in it and that much. And often that would kind of sit up, private equity guy and say, well, okay, maybe this is somebody who, if they believe in it that much, that they're kind of willing to work for equity. I'm not saying you should always work for free, and there's a big difference between working for free and working for equity. Right. But it's certainly a way to get in the door, because you are an industry person, you're showing flexibility, belief, commitment to see a deal through. Because often when you work for equity, you collect the cash when the private equity exits, at that point in time. And so, that is one way to get in. And then, the searches are the harder way to get in, just because, they may want the marketing person. Oh, by the way, I am looking for a marketing person on one of the boards that we're working on. It comes down to super specific skill sets. And then in my experience, it's best to talk to the headhunters, because the headhunting firm will have 100 people that they'll know, and they'll say, oh, these 5 fit what that company wants in terms of diversity. And so it is a longer process, but I do think long-term the companies themselves do perform better when they have the diversity on them.
So one of the questions here was, do independent directors on private companies all receive equity? And that is a practice that you see pretty much across the board, right?
Yeah, not always.
Okay.
So sometimes it's shadow equity, particularly when you're dealing cross countries and cross tax jurisdictions. Right. But also, we're investing more proprietary capital today, so I can't necessarily give a commitment to exit in all cases. Some of our companies have defined exit paths to go public or to do a trade sale. But so you have to sometimes be more creative, depending on the nature of the capital.
Okay.
Agree.
One great question here: what are the pros and cons of considering an advisor versus board member position for a private company? Some companies have advisory boards versus fiduciary boards. What's the advantage or disadvantage?
Well, I mean, look, I think it's a nice entree if you're not currently a director or you simply have an interest in the industry. I think it's a great way to sort of, you don't get all the information the board gets, but you do get a lot of it. And typically, if a company is looking at an advisory board, it means, you've got some either expertise or reach or visibility to an industry or to a group of or a group within an industry where they like access to. So they'd like to pick your brain on certain things where they see you can be helpful to them in the future. You know, I don't have time to do an advisory board now, so I wouldn't. But I think it's a great way to either begin or to escalate your board career by serving an advisory board.
I think, as you said, a lot of times advisory boards are more network, right? And as opposed to into the operations, into the how the company's performing, and so different roles. Some private companies, are less defined. They're smaller, and you find it a little bit more synonymous. But tends to be, for me, advisories network, and a board roles a lot more, in the weeds.
Got it.
It's definitely less liability, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, and and as Jarvis said, start as an advisor and get to know, if you're a little unsure, you haven't been able to do enough due diligence, but you think this could lead to the right, be the right place. Start as an advisor, and then, go on as a full director when you have the confidence.
So, one of the things that there are probably a lot of people here who serve on private boards or and are looking for people for their boards. When you bring on a new director, what is the process you use to onboard new directors onto a private board? I mean, this is something that public boards struggle with too, but I'm sure, private boards, they've got a lot going on every day, and you got to bring these people up to speed. What are some of the best practices you've seen, or what do you do?
So there's a difference between best practice and what happens, right?
What do you wish you could do all the time?
Yeah, I mean, it's. It really should be no different for an employee and a board member, in my opinion, in the sense that they need to understand, not just core values, but strategy, business plans, the products, and often, if you are coming even from the same industry, one company describes ourselves, their products differently than the next, and really getting in and understanding that. I mean, I want every person in my firm to be a salesperson, whether that's once every other year or every day. So, and that only happens when people understand, not only the product, the company, how it's made, and believe in it. And so, for me, I'd rather do something fuller in terms of written information and one-on-one conversations. And I often will pick a younger or mid-level person and let them do the teach-ins. We also build video libraries up for people to, and Google is amazing today, and we do it both on exit interviews and also for product or transfer of knowledge, but also for kind of teach-ins across products, and our video libraries are pretty expansive.
That's neat.
And sort of beyond the orientation, every board that I'm on, especially where I'm a lead director, we also have a corporate NACD membership. And so beyond our orientation, as a lead director, I'll sit down with each of them and I'll suggest that they, go on the website, review the materials, the general board materials, as well as the basic materials for each of the committees that I've appointed them to, so that they, even if they're experienced directors, there's new information that comes out very frequently. So I encourage them to take advantage of those resources.
I can tell you the worst one I ever did.
Okay.
So I served on a board of a company called RA, which was just restructured our capita. We took it out of bankruptcy. The Central Bank of Bahrain asked me to sit on the board. It was the first Sharia-compliant bankruptcy done in the United States in the Southern District. So I reported to the bankruptcy judge as well as to a board of clerics. So I walked in, and there was no employees, and we had an entire new board because they had fired all the employees through the bankruptcy process.
Oh my God.
This was a bank with $6.5 billion of liabilities that we had to manage. And on day one, had to go in, and nobody knew anything about nothing. And so that's how not to build a board.
How not to do it. Okay, you can learn from those experiences. So one of the questions I have here is how do How do you make yourself known to PE companies that you're interested in a board? There's thousands of you guys out there. And, with the recruiters, there's big companies, small companies, people we know, you send your resume. How do you get to know people?
It's tough. When I was at Ashmore, which was 80 billion, or Castle Lake, which was 15 billion, and still today, my inbox is 500, 700, emails a day. I have 15 chat apps. There's a new one called Beeper that can aggregate all of them. Pretty cool. I met the CEO last week, and it's worth the $10 a month so that you can actually, collate and organize the information flows. It's, so email outreach, everybody gets offended. And my wife, why didn't you return this call? Why didn't you do that? If you're just so overwhelmed by being a portfolio manager, it's impossible. So it takes, events like this. It takes industry, events where you're spending time. You have introductions, informal. It takes effort to network through LinkedIn, through blogging. People, pick up different things. What you're passionate about. It doesn't even have to be necessarily how to be the best director in the world. But it takes effort.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slog. It's a journey.
It is.
I think some of the best advice I got was, before I was ever on a major private or public company board, was you have no idea where that first board is going to come from. It's going to come from someone who you least expected, some speech you were given, some client you were talking to, somebody who's been exposed to you, has a need and says, you know what, she would be great for this board. And I know I said this before, your day-to-day lives are your best resume for future boards. Obviously, getting yourself into the database of the search firms so that, because the first thing they do is go back and put in certain keywords, and if your bio, your experience, has that keyword in, it's going to pop up. We've used a search firm every search I've been in, and I think at least half of them, a referral from a sitting director ended up getting the seat. Not that they didn't bring great candidates, but just about every search I've done, at least half the board has someone who they know, who they've worked with, who may have a specific expertise that we need, and they recommend them, and they just go right into the search firm process with all the other directors. So they just get it to be another name, and they have to work their way through the process as well. So if they ended up as the right director, then that's because they really had the skill set that we needed. So, many, many, many different ways. If you're not a director currently, don't get discouraged. It's a process. And keep letting people know you're interested. To the point where you might sort of feel like you're starting to become a pest. But appropriately let people know that you think you have a skill that you can add, and that you're interested in serving, and that you're willing to serve, and you have the authority to serve. That's also really important. Make sure that your company allows you as an employee to serve as a member of another company.
I'd also be specific. A lot of times it get inbound and it's unclear. Is this person looking for an executive position, or are they looking for a director position? And so I would say like 90% of the time. And so it's like, well, then now it takes time and effort on my part to kind of categorize this person. And it's not that we put everybody in categories, but it's like, well, what do I need on what day? And some days we need executives, and some days we need directors. And so I'd be specific in terms of what you're looking for. And even if you change your mind later, that's fine. But I would say I'm looking for a director role, and that will help a lot.
I have found that the most important thing, especially you said you have hundreds of inbound emails. I mean, recruiters get hundreds every day. And I think the thing that's the toughest is, how do you cut through, and how do you make sure you're top of mind? I mean, literally top of mind. How do you make sure you're one of the first five people that person thinks of when they hear or they know they need to construct a board?
It's typically either a relationship,
Yep.
and if it's not a relationship, which it is probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, it is a very specific expertise. You're a turnaround expert. You have an expertise that the board is currently in a situation where they need exactly what it is that you bring to the table.
Exactly. And I think it's important to have that message, that real short narrative that says, this is what Jarvis is good at doing. I heard about this. I'm thinking of him. And I think that's the most difficult thing. And I know there's a lot of people, I get calls, as I'm sure you guys do, for people who say, can you get me on private board, public board, whatever. And if you're one of 20 business cards that gets handed to somebody, and that person has done nothing else other than give you a business card, it's not going to happen. If you invest in a relationship, it's like any other relationship, right? You invite them to your Christmas party. You invite them to an event that you're holding. You get to know them. Then it increases your chance of being top of mind. And I think that's probably
and I think it's not just get to know them, but also get to know the opportunity or the company, the industry. And so it's context of like, hey, this person already is going to be a contributor. It's that natural of a fit. Even if you're not from that industry, the IT person trying to go oil gas or oil and gas trying to go IT, even more so, I think you need to show that you have an understanding of that opportunity set.
Should prospective board members consider if they are being asked to become investors when they're not properly capitalized? Should prospective board members be expected to invest in a company?
I always like to say, have skin in the game, right? But I think, again, it really depends on the stage of the company. And you as whether it's a promoter or somebody who's setting up the board should be clear on your expectations. And likewise, you as a director should be clear on what your role is here. And a lot of people who are directors have been successful in their career and they want to invest. And that's great, but be upfront that, you invest under, certain circumstances, but not in, you create your own limits but set expectations up front. I think that can reduce the amount of friction that could come up.
Yeah, I just think it's fact specific, really. I've been on boards where there's 5 of us and the other 4 were founding investors. And so had I been another founding investor, I probably would not have been asked to serve on that board. Right. Because I brought the independence and some other things that the board at least thought they needed as relates to them being able to go out and raise other capital. They needed some independence, and I happened to be that. So that's a situation where not being an investor was helpful. So I think it really is fact specific.
Interesting question about continuing education, continuing board education. As we sit here, the reason everyone's here is because everyone here believes in continuing board education. Is that something that you require or encourage of your private company directors?
I haven't, but it was funny. I was listening to something on Web 3.0, and it annoyed me completely yesterday. It was that it would beep at me like I had to click the button to keep getting my continuing education credits. Oh. And I was listening to it not because I wanted the continuing education, but I was interested in the topic and what they were saying on hand. So no, but look, I think it is good to stay current. And from my personal perspective, you don't always have to do continuing education, credits to stay current. If you're in a limited number of boards, then it is worthwhile for sure to do the continuing education credits, and because it is a good way to stay on top of things.
Yeah, I mean, it won't hurt. It will not hurt if you're building a board resume, having certain certifications, having gone through some of the NACD trainings is helpful. At a point, then your board career is your resume. So it's less important. So I think it's about you assessing sort of where you are and getting together with a couple of really good friends who are your relationships, who are either seeking directorships themselves or are current directors, to say, should I really go through this certification? Again, I just think it's, take a look at where you are in your board life. And, but, as I said, most of my companies do have memberships, and I definitely encourage them to at least study up on the committees and review the information that affects, what they do every day. So.
Yeah, again, good governance is good governance, right? And I also find that as boards are looking for a lot of specific skills, technology, cyber, things like that, private companies as well, it's still important for directors to be able to be directors across the board on everything. Because otherwise, you just need to bring in an expert advisor, right? If you're looking for a director with those skills, you're also looking for a director that understands other fiduciary responsibilities. So,
yeah, I mean, particularly as a private company, you're usually understaffed, and you need people that can do multiple things. An athlete, often is the terminology we use, and because in a lot of these boards, if you start committees and you start graduating towards a public, you might start running committee structures with 5 people on the board or 7 people on the board. Well, guess what? That means you're, as the independent, you're probably serving on every committee. Yeah. And, that's a heavy lift, obviously, but having been ability to wear multiple hats, particularly in the private company context, adds a lot of value.
well, great. I've been told by the powers that be that we're running out of time. I want to thank both Brent and Jarvis for your time today. This has been very enlightening, great conversation. Your experience is tremendous and probably has given a lot of food for thought for our audience here. So thank you so much. Please join me in a round of applause.
Thanks, Anna.